Tim, who works with me, said we should trellis the cucumbers. And I said, do you want to do that? And he says, sure. That's Tim. That's Cucumber Master. So he's done it, and they look beautiful. And it really speeds up the harvest and keeps them nice and straight because they hang. So we already picked this morning, so there shouldn't be any harvestable ones in here. And these are the slightly smaller ones. This way, it speeds up harvest because you don't have to find them. And theoretically should give the plants probably double the lifespan because you're not walking all over them in order to do the pick. A fresh market specialty crop farm, is a lot of it is just making sure you line up your labor availability with your crop needs and your sales outlets. So yeah, I don't think people will be, you want a different flavor of cucurbit, so maybe some squash by then. Well, they get all those things, but I've been trying to normalize just eating vegetables, so I'll just show up at practice with like a armload of cucumbers and ask kids who wants one, and half of them are kind of looking at me aghast, but 2 or 3 really adventurous ones will say, I'll take a cucumber. Start eating it while they're throwing. So baby steps. Not a ton of color in here because we picked them pretty hard this morning, finish off the CSA shares. These plants will get 20 plus feet tall. Well, the ultimate reason is they pay more, so they get slightly more food, and sometimes that's more of the same item, sometimes it's a novel item. So in order to fill the value for the large shares, they might just get an item that either didn't fit in price-wise for the smalls or that we only have a limited amount of. Right now, it's more the latter, because he's just started producing this week, so we didn't quite have enough to send them to everybody. I would say next week there's a very strong chance. It looks a little cooler once you have a little more color, because you can see the gradient, because they ripen from the stem out. So it'll be just a kind of a waterfall of color from red to green along these long belts of tomatoes. Yeah, this is a variety called Sakura, or Sakura, if you're going to say it in the original Japanese. Well, when we can get organic seed for this variety, the size I think is perfect because they're relatively large for cherry tomato. They store well, they grow well, they taste great. So they just check every box for a commercial grower. These are my favorite ones just to eat. I know a lot of people like Sun Golds, but I'd prefer these. They're a little meatier tasting. Yeah, this is where I live, where our barns are, where our shop is, where the greenhouses are, and then a couple acres of crop ground. But most of our crop ground is off the home farm, about from 1 mile that way to 5 miles that way. So we're on the road quite a bit. It gives you some certain rotational benefits. So if you're moving your potatoes 2 or 3 miles every year, it really keeps you ahead of some of the bugs. So it's annoying, but it's also good. If we had one big 100-acre square, that would be really efficient for production and movement of materials, but you'd never be able to rotate away from your pests. So that helps. But, we have, this is a field of oats and peas and buckwheat that we'll be tilling this in probably within the week to get ready to plant beets the second week of July for fall harvest. So there's not a ton going on here at the home farm. You can see that here. A lot of the equipment is here. Down there we have some more cover crop where the carrots are going to go, and then beyond that in the plastic is the sweet potatoes, which we had winter squash down there last year, which we harvested most of it. There was one kind of low spot through the field that had water running through it, but otherwise this field did stay out of the flood zone barely. So we got a crop out of here. Diminished yield because it was just too much rain. Our worst damage was further downriver. Because, in Vermont, as rivers go lower in elevation, they fill up with more water. This isn't the Rio Grande that evaporates by the time it reaches the end. Yeah, we had one field that just got basically just like torn apart. But yeah, I think this year should feel pretty easy if it's just not flooding. Yeah, I always say if I'm comfortable and I'm sleeping, most crops aren't growing very well. And I've been sleeping really comfortably until about 3 nights ago. So things have really jumped this week just with the heat because, we think 92 is crazy, but most of our crops are pretty happy at it. If it was 92 every day for a couple of weeks, they might get a little exhausted, but they're taking it when they can, especially things like sweet potatoes, which they grow in the South right now. So they like 90 every day. Corn loves 90. The brassicas don't love it, but that's fine. Potatoes even like it. They don't love it. And everything, I think, is appreciating just the additional soil warmth that we're getting. Finally having nights in the 60s. Or 70s, as it were. So we plant corn 4 times, and each planting 2 weeks apart. has 3 varieties of staggered maturity. So on May 15th, we'll plant 3 varieties with 65, 72, and 80-day maturities. So we can harvest over the course of 2 weeks. And then by the time that last harvested variety is done, the first variety from the one planted 2 weeks later starts. So hopefully you have kind of like an overlap like this in all your plantings. So it's called succession planting. So you take advantage of different planting dates and maturity dates. Corn's pretty easy to do that with. Whereas you try to do it with broccoli, and good luck. You're still going to have them all come in at once sometimes and have none come in at once. Transplanting corn is a pretty niche thing. And we're at the scale, we should probably be direct seeding our last 3 plantings. But we're set up to transplant, so we just do it. But putting in an acre of transplanted corn every 2 weeks is a pretty big chunk of time. It takes 3 people, not quite a full day, but not half a day. Yeah, we have some carousel transplanters, and we use transplanting machines for everything, but you still have to sit there and feed the machine. Yeah. And somebody has to, Ross does most of the transplanter driving. He just has to sit there driving really slow, listening to tunes. We're almost at the end of the seedling season. Just the fall brassicas are planted right now in here. So we have cabbages and fall broccoli, cauliflower, and those will get transplanted probably on Friday. What do you think, Nikki? Can we put these in Friday, Thursday? So we got rain coming on Friday, so it'd be awesome if we could transplant on Thursday all day.
Yeah, we
definitely corn.
Yeah.
But if we get these in, that would be. It's really nice to be able to actually transplant on a Thursday and have it rain all day on a Friday.
Yeah.
It really takes the stress out of trying to get these guys to survive. I always feel like a jerk because I'm always happy when it rains on the weekend. Because, when it rains on a Tuesday, we have to find stuff for people to do indoors. Yeah. Which we often have, but sometimes we don't. But if it rains on a Saturday, I get to sleep in, which is really nice. Right. There's some kale there. So those are both 2 tables. That's our big fall lacinato kale planting. And then a bunch of different varieties of cabbage, which already have differentiated their leaf shapes. We always tell our winter CSA members you should always have a 5-pound bag of carrots in the fridge and at least a head of cabbage. So if you have a 5-pound bag of carrots and a head of cabbage, you have dinner ready in 15 minutes if you don't want to cook. You can just shred stuff. Add a little bit, whatever your favorite vinegar-based slaw is. Shred, toss, eat. This is bonkers. There's probably like 15 pounds of tomatoes hanging from each of these plants. So they're a little slow getting going this year. So we're about a week behind, mainly because we just had no sun in May. They're putting out fruit. It's just that the ripenings happen a little bit slower. So normally we would have had tomatoes for everybody this week. But instead, I think we only had enough for large. As you can see, there's not much color in here. Next week there will be, though, especially after this heat. They should, hopefully. You can see how many green tomatoes there are. And usually they ripen sort of, from the bottom up, obviously. And so each of these plants, you can just look at how many cuts there are on this. So these are very manicured. So that was a leaf, leaf, sucker, leaf, sucker, leaf, sucker, leaf. So it's a lot of scissor work in here, essentially, to orderly. It depends. These are what are called indeterminate tomatoes. So they'll just grow forever until they die. So these plants will be about 20 feet tall by the time we stop harvesting in September. And so we haven't gotten there yet, but you see these are climbing up these trellis wires, and they will hit that support wire in about 10 days. And then a week after that, you have to start lowering them down. And then we run the bottoms of the plants along the ground, and then they go up again. So as they keep getting taller, you have to just manipulate the plants. But it's the best way to get high yields, and also when it rains out, we have work to do inside. So we have quite a bit of greenhouse work, which we try to do on our multiple rainy days, but sometimes you do it on a day like today because it hasn't rained. Tomatoes are really good at dying of disease, specifically moisture-related disease. So when you grow a field tomato, basically you get 3 weeks of harvest before the plant starts succumbing to the various blights that will come with constant morning dew, heavy rain, soil splash. In a greenhouse environment, not only do we keep it warmer, specifically warmer at night, but also there's no rain. You get a little bit of dew in here, but it's usually more guttation of the leaves. But they'll be wet in the morning, but it's not dew. It's basically, before sunrise, it's usually about 100% relative humidity in the air. So the leaves are trying to evaporate water, but it can't evaporate. So it's more like sweat than dew. It's a closer analog. But But the greenhouse environment just allows us to control the diseases so much better, which allows us to have a 3-4 month harvest season on each plant instead of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So when I farmed in New York State when I was younger, I would be Florida basket weave trellising like an acre of tomatoes that we put in 3 separate times to probably get the production of like 3 of these greenhouses. So it's like I wouldn't be surprised if you're an order of magnitude higher yield in a greenhouse environment per square foot than you would be outside. In our climate, I mean, in Florida, it's a different story. But around here, we have nights in the 40s in July. That's way too cold for a tomato plant to thrive. We always, most of our business is selling to stores, so we can't ship a ripe tomato. Not saying it won't get ripe, because once a tomato has any color like that, if you leave it on your counter, it will develop those less tasty sugars into the sugars that you appreciate in a tomato. It's not, you hear stories of, oh, the Florida tomatoes are gassed. That's different. They're harvested at this level of green. So ours have fully accumulated all the sugar precursors by the time we've harvested them. But we harvest usually slightly redder than that. But if that got harvested, it would be okay. But that, I would put that on my counter for 5 days before eating it. Yeah, room temperature. So with Mighty Boots, we try to harvest them so that they will be pretty good on Wednesday. But you might have to wait till Thursday or Friday, certain times of the year. Other times of the year, you might want to really eat it on Wednesday. Yeah, if it's got that nice softness to it, that makes me stress out. I know I can't ship that, but that's when it tastes good.